Okay, it was December 28th, 2011, 6 days before the biggest event in all of Republican presidential politics. 6 days before the 2012 Iowa Republican caucuses, the political ground shook beneath the state of Iowa. We led our show with it that night as breaking news. Watch. We actually do have some legitimate breaking news to report right now out of Iowa. With 6 days to go until the Iowa caucuses, there has been a rather dramatic development just moments ago tonight in the Republican race for president. What you're looking at right there is a campaign event that is underway right now in Des Moines. It's a campaign event for Republican Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, who you see speaking there. The two latest polls out of Iowa show Congressman Paul in first place in the PPP poll and in second place in the CNN poll. More on that in a moment. But the breaking news tonight is that Ron Paul appears to have scored a bit of a coup in his effort to win Iowa. Shortly before Dr. Paul took the stage there in Des Moines tonight, an Iowa Republican state senator who's named Kent Sorenson was introduced to the Ron Paul supporting crowd. Now, up until tonight, Mr. Sorenson had been serving as an Iowa state co-chair for the Michelle Bachmann campaign. The reason he was being introduced at a Ron Paul rally was to announce that he's switching sides. Six days before the 2012 Iowa caucus, the co-chair of Michelle Bachmann's presidential campaign in Iowa switched teams. On the eve, essentially, of that election, the Bachmann campaign chair announced that he was leaving the Michelle Bachmann campaign and instead throwing his support to Ron Paul. Now, that defection itself was news. We covered it as breaking news that night. As you can see, I was wearing the same jacket. But the allegation from Michelle Bachmann that followed that news, that ended up being a real political bombshell that's taken a few years to go off. Now, because it's Michelle Bachmann, I have to tell you, the delivery of her big news that night, it was a little Bachmann-esque, but still you'll get the point.
Kent Sorenson personally told, excuse me just a moment. Kent Sorenson said to me yesterday, here we go, sorry about that. Kent Sorenson personally told me he was offered a large sum of money to go to work for the Ron Paul campaign. Kent campaigned with us earlier this afternoon in Indianola, Iowa, and then he went immediately afterward to a Ron Paul event and announced that he is changing teams. Kent said to me yesterday that everyone sells out in Iowa. Why shouldn't I?
Everyone sells out in Iowa. Why shouldn't I? That allegation, that hilarious Michelle Bachmann leveled against Republican State Senator Kent Sorenson that night, it was that he had been paid to do this, right? He cut a secret deal of some sort with the Ron Paul campaign. He traded his Ron Paul endorsement for cash. That is an allegation that would not only violate Iowa state law, potentially it would violate federal election law as well. And that night, the night that he switched sides, one of our own NBC reporters, Anthony Terrell, tracked down Kent Sorenson to get his reaction to those charges.
So, Kent, you've probably seen what the Bachmann campaign is saying.
Yeah,
that you personally told her you offered a large sum of money to join the Ron Paul campaign. How do you react?
Listen, that's absurd. Like I said before, the people on this campaign supported me in my race. They worked tirelessly for me. They stuffed envelopes. They door knocked for me. I feel like I'm coming home to them.
Have you spoken to Michelle Bachmann about this at all? She said you personally told her that you offered a sum of money.
No, that's not true.
Not true at all?
No.
Were you offered any sum of money?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. I was never offered any money from the Ron Paul campaign. I never accepted any money from the Ron Paul campaign. Kent Sorenson denied that anything like that happened, as did Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul himself on national television a few days later. Ron Paul told Fox News Sunday that did not happen. And for a time, that was sort of the end of that scandal. A wounded Michelle Bachmann went on to place 6th in the Iowa caucuses a few days later. Then she dropped out of the presidential race the next day. Ron Paul finished 3rd, which was good enough to send his campaign on to New Hampshire. But when the political storm left the state of Iowa, what it left behind were these salacious allegations that there was basically a market in Iowa, a market in which Republican presidential endorsements for the Iowa caucuses were being bought and sold for cash. After the dust had finally cleared in the 2012 presidential race, after Barack Obama had been sworn in for a second term as president, there was still this hangover in Republican politics and in Iowa politics, this sort of hangover worry about the all-important Iowa caucuses, which have such an important role in choosing presidential candidates in this country. Do the Iowa Republican caucuses have a bribery problem? Well, about a year later, in February 2013, A former staffer for Michelle Bachmann filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission. And while Michelle Bachmann had claimed, right before the Iowa caucuses, the night she lost her campaign manager to Ron Paul, while Michelle Bachmann had claimed the only reason she lost him was because Ron Paul was paying money to that guy to get his endorsement. What Michelle Bachmann's former staffer claimed in this complaint was actually that Michelle Bachmann was paying too. Michelle Bachmann had also had that guy on the payroll for his endorsement. That complaint was filed February 2013. Later that year, October 2013, the Iowa State Ethics Commission concluded an exhaustive investigation into those allegations about bribery in the caucuses. And on that specific complaint that the Michelle Bachmann campaign did pay this elected official in Iowa for his support, the State Ethics Commission basically found that claim to be substantiated. And that same day, the same day the report came out, the bribee, the Michelle Bachmann campaign manager, he resigned his seat in the Iowa State Senate. Although I should mention that he declared in an email to his supporters that same day that he'd done nothing wrong, that it was a straight-up political witch hunt, and that the whole thing was probably because he was so verbally against gay marriage. Sure, whatever. Interestingly, though, in that more than 500-page report from the Iowa Ethics Commission, they were mostly looking into that specific claim that Michelle Bachmann's campaign had been paying bribes. But they also noted, almost as an aside, that it did appear that in addition to what he got from Michelle Bachmann, that this Iowa senator also got money from somewhere else. They noted $73,000 that had been paid to that same guy in the form of suspicious wire transfers. Deeply suspicious, they called them. Well, what's that all about? The next month, November 2013, FBI agents executed a search warrant at that state senator's home. Then 4 months later, so in March of this year, that Michelle Bachmann staffer who'd filed the original complaint about bribes being paid for endorsements in the Iowa Republican caucuses, that staffer amended his complaint this year to say there was evidence that not only was the Michelle Bachmann campaign paying bribes, so too was the Ron Paul campaign. Now, Ron Paul had denied this publicly. His campaign had denied it publicly, right? It was just crazy Michelle Bachmann scrolling around on her iPad saying this thing that nobody believed because it's something that came out of Michelle Bachmann's mouth. But once that formal complaint was made, hey, Ron Paul was bribing too, there was an investigation of that formal complaint. There were public reports of grand juries in Iowa looking into these allegations. And today, in a surprise move, in what may turn out to be a bombshell not just for Iowa politics, not just for a presidential campaign that's already over and people like Michelle Bachmann and Ron Paul who are already out of politics, but in what may be a bombshell for Republican politics now, and specifically for Republican efforts to take the Senate now, this year. Today, the surprise news is that this has all been resolved. Apparently, it wasn't a political witch hunt because this guy was against gay marriage. It wasn't just, kooky claims from kooky Michelle Bachmann. Today, former Iowa Republican State Senator Kent Sorenson pled guilty in federal court on 2 charges. He has yet to be sentenced, but he's facing between 5 years and 25 years in prison and a $500,000 total fine. We've posted his plea agreement online if you want to read it yourself. It's fun reading, but the bottom line is basically that he admits to having taken bribes for his endorsement. He was bribed by the Ron Paul for President campaign. They paid him a total of $73,000 for his endorsement in Iowa. What he pled guilty to was working with the Ron Paul campaign to lie about the bribe money they paid to him when the campaign wrote up its expenditures and disclosed its expenditures in a federal document. He also pled guilty to lying about it to investigators, which is the obstruction of justice charge in this case. But bribery is one of those political crimes that takes two to make a thing go right. Which is why this is a bombshell that reaches way beyond this one Iowa state senator and Iowa Republican politics. This is the statement that Ken Sorenson's attorney released when the plea agreement was announced today. It says, quote, Mr. Sorenson's pleas are part of the process of taking complete responsibility for the series of compounding errors and omissions that he engaged in, aided and abetted, and participated in with others. Oh, yeah, right. You can't bribe yourself. If you're guilty of taking a bribe, then that means somebody must have... he didn't trick the Ron Paul campaign in describing the bribes they paid to him as payments to some film company. They didn't think they were actually getting film production for the price of $73,000, which is what they told the FEC. They were bribing him. He's now going to maybe go to prison for 25 years because he got caught for taking the bribe and for covering it up. He's pled guilty today to helping them do it. But what about them? Who was in charge of the Ron Paul campaign when this was happening? Who done it? This man is the campaign manager now for Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. The Kentucky senator who's embroiled in a very tough re-election race right now. He's the top Republican in the Senate. He will become Senate Majority Leader if he succeeds in his plan for Republicans to take over the Senate in this fall's elections. His campaign manager is named Jesse Benton. Jesse Benton, at the time the Ron Paul campaign was bribing people for their endorsements in Iowa in 2011, at that time, Jesse Benton was in charge of the Ron Paul for President campaign. That October, before the Iowa caucuses, this is the email from the Kent Sorenson camp, laying out Kent Sorenson's demands about how much he wanted to be bribed, how much he wanted to be paid to switch his endorsement from Michelle Bachmann to Ron Paul. Here's the reply from Jesse Benton in November of that year, following up, saying he really wanted to get Kent Sorenson on board. The following month, December 26th, a Ron Paul campaign staffer handed Kent Sorenson a check for $25,000 in the bathroom of an Iowa restaurant. 2 days later, Kent Sorenson announced his change of heart. Now he's endorsing Ron Paul. Shortly thereafter, Kent Sorenson wondered on the phone whether or not the candidate himself, Ron Paul, knew about this bribery that had happened. He says he didn't know about Ron Paul himself, but he knew for sure that Jesse Benton knew that the Ron Paul campaign had paid him that bribe.
You're getting the whole Ron Paul and like all them know, the inside group.
Sure, I'm sure Jesse Benton knows. He's a scum.
Oh, I know Jesse knows. I know Jesse knows.
Does Jesse know? Does the Mitch McConnell re-election campaign in Kentucky have a problem here? If the Mitch McConnell campaign manager also ran a presidential campaign 2 years ago that was bribing people for their endorsements, and now people are looking at 25 years in prison for accepting those bribes? We called Mitch McConnell's campaign today asking if they or Jesse Benton himself wanted to give us a statement on this matter. We have not heard back. I do not know if we will, but I live in hope. Watch this space. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Not a good day for McConnell's campaign manager,
Indeed.
and not a good day for McConnell, Rachel.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, man. Take it easy.
Thank you.